What a strange, murky, and muddy area free speech land has become nowadays. Rife with disingenuous people who are in it just to confuse shit so they can get some airtime for their preferred brand of vile views. It's become a topic exploited and misrepresented to an extent where we don't even get to any real, meaty, important conversations about actual free speech. And there's plenty of them to be had. I quite enjoy and appreciate those. But from the internet landscape, you'd gather that the largest issues involve lamenting how you're no longer able to use the N-word in polite society without facing consequences, or not being able to invite neo-Nazis to campus unopposed, not being able to make jokes about murder in a professional environment, about blackface being frowned upon, all these stupid things that have formed the core of the so-called free speech warriors' conversations. While we see them threaten lawsuits at the drop of a hat for someone tweeting something about them that they happen to disagree with, or while they call for entire fields of study to be defunded because they've been corrupted by cultural Marxism or something. In this slimy, Trumpy, confused on free speech environment, you often hear the phrase, "sunlight is the best disinfectant." So, join me for the first half of a fascinating panel today where we chat about whether that's true or not, and is it really as simple as a yes or no answer? Is it applicable across the board to all sorts of political climates, even as authoritarian, bigoted views gain ground? I mean, should anti-Ahmadi views be given legitimacy in a Pakistani university, for example, in a climate where anti-Ahmadi sentiment is already so high, endorsed by the state even? I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but is that really a place where it's responsible to simply hear all sides? I mean, we really try to delve into the different contexts and situations that may affect whether simple exposure works as a natural deterrent for abhorrent views, or whether it can be a promotional tool for those views as well. And just as I record this, I keep in mind all the far-right attacks in the U.S. over the past couple of weeks and the president's continued hateful rhetoric, which seems to have emboldened such acts. I'm also painfully aware that Bannon filled thousands of seats for a prominent debate with David Frum in my own city of Toronto. And guess what? The debate backfired massively. They tallied the results all wrong and falsely showed that by the end of the debate, 43% of the people had shifted to being open to Bannon's views as opposed to the initial 28%. This was totally incorrect and some sort of technical glitch, we're told, but you know how fake news spreads way faster than corrections, right? The damage and legitimizing had already been done. Bannon got the propaganda he wanted. Mainstream headlines saying things like, "Steve Bannon's showmanship wins him plenty of converts in monk debate." And even Frum admits in a sad, tail between his legs sort of take from The Atlantic that he had indeed still been party to spreading discouragement rather than, as he believed, sparking faith and hope. There's just so much confusion and absolutism around this topic that it's incredibly frustrating. Free speech doesn't mean that every rando that invites you to debate a topic of their choice is owed your time or attention or a particular platform. And I personally think that a private company is well within their rights to boot you off their website for violating their terms or code of conduct. Whatever happens to these Rubenesque advocates of the marketplace of ideas, whenever the marketplace is choosing to reject certain ideas, they just can't accept it. And you know, I actually used to really believe, out of fear and concern for handing them even more power, the whole don't deplatform these fucks because you'll only feed into their popularity narrative. For those who followed my work, you probably heard a few of my free speech panels, one of them on Milo being removed from Twitter. My positions have shifted along the way and evolved and become a lot more nuanced, I'd like to think. But you know, I was never the kind of free speecher that thinks people shouldn't have consequences for their speech. I always recognized that protesting someone's speech was also an exercising of other speech. But I just worried that maybe we were giving Milo another tool to claim victimhood with and gain more sympathies. I'm so happy to report that I was wrong, And it seems like he's desperately trying to remain relevant and failing. So, yeah. Okay, now a couple of things before we move on to the actual episode. I just wanted to remind listeners that this show is funded entirely by you. It's simply not possible to keep it going without new audience support via Patreon or PayPal, and that's becoming more important now than ever. You'll hear why in just a second. So if you enjoy the conversations and have been listening free of charge, please consider donating to help this show thrive and survive. And if you really can't do that, please consider sharing the content and leaving an iTunes review. These episodes are time-consuming to edit, schedule, organize, research, so any help would be truly appreciated. Now, I also wanted to make a quick announcement as well. I am almost 8 months pregnant at this time. You know, I thought I'd take Peterson's advice and become a trad wife and make babies. I kid. Even feminist cucks like me want babies sometimes. Okay, jokes aside now. I'm about to have my hands really full, literally. I'm going to record, hopefully, some content in advance so it carries me into 2 to 3 months after the baby comes. After that, I really don't know what my life will be like, what my schedule will be like, and I'll certainly have to reevaluate whether this whole podcast project is worth continuing. I absolutely love doing it for you guys, but there are times where it has been so emotionally exhausting and draining, and the hate and death and rape threats and horrid emails really get to me at times. And without much growth or budget, I really wonder if it's worth the trouble to keep this tiny operation going. So I'm not making any decisions right now, but how things go in the next few months will be crucial. If you ever considered supporting the show, now would be the time. Of course, I thank all the patrons who have made it possible this far. I couldn't have done it without you guys. You're awesome. And now that that's out of the way, let's get on to part 1 of the episode. Keep an eye out for part 2 next week.
Make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects, and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, ex-Muslim host Aina, keeping it non-controversial. Welcome to panel 16. Is sunlight really the best disinfectant? Today I've got Guardian columnist Nesrine Malik joining me, along with YouTuber Destiny. Hey guys, thanks so much for coming on.
Hi.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, I mean, as you guys know, this has been quite a long and painful topic to find guests for and schedule and all that, because it's so hard to find people that you can actually have a productive conversation with on this topic and aren't just like some Dave Rubin types of inconsistent free speech warriors. So truly, thanks a lot for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Nesrine, you've written some interesting articles on this topic. You know, you just wrote one recently about how indulging Steve Bannon is just a form of liberal narcissism. And you say white supremacy and fascist flirtations are not ideas that need to be exposed. We just need to fight them. So I was hoping you could speak to that a bit.
Well, I found that that those who are in favor of Steve Bannon being hosted and interviewed ad nauseum tended kind of very rarely to be those on the right, and mostly were those in the center or left of center who felt that it was some sort of exercise of free speech issue rather than one of purpose or one of merit. So it wasn't, I felt like people didn't want to speak to Steve Bannon because they felt like they would learn anything new or that he was presenting anything valuable to discourse. I think it felt like it was only something people were interested in because it somehow proved that liberals were robust and could have conversations with people who didn't agree with them, which I just thought felt quite indulgent and quite detached from the risks of normalization. And it just struck me as more of a kind of liberal university debating team fantasy than it was a genuine pursuit of journalistic virtue, integrity, value, or even really challenge. Because once you did look at these interviews that he had, whether it was at The Economist, the FT, in the UK, he was hosted a couple of times as well on Good Morning TV and then radio, it was rarely a challenge that he was faced with. It was just kind of a soft poking here and there, and so it didn't really feel like he was even being challenged, and so it just felt to me like it was just some sort of bracing exercise for liberals rather than something they genuinely believed in.
I mean, I do see that a lot of the people that are very pro hearing almost anyone, Tommy Robinson, anyone, anywhere, Richard Spencer, Bannon, firstly, they don't have the same views when it comes to Islamists being heard, and they don't advocate for their freedom of speech in the same passionate manner. And it does seem to be, to me, removed from reality, like especially of the consequences that others may face of having these people being given like large, prominent, prestigious platforms. What do you think, Destiny?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I have to agree with almost everything that's been said so far. I'm a big, or at least I was, a big proponent of the idea of free speech, but it seems like more often than not, people that are advocating for it the most are not really concerned so much with the idea of free speech, but more that it's a tool to platform, I guess, the most aggressive or offensive ideas they can, oftentimes in an area where they're absolutely being unchallenged. And it seems to be not a positive thing when practiced the way it so often seems to be today. You mentioned Dave Rubin earlier, but that would be a really good example. The idea of, I'm all for free speech, and I am too. But free speech doesn't mean you give somebody who might be a literal Nazi, carte blanche to come onto your platform and preach for an hour and a half without any real challenge to anything they've said.
Right. While you nod along, like it's pretty dangerous to have that happen.
Yeah. So
I watched Bannon on the Economist event that he was on, and it just seemed like, he was really mopping the floor with his opponent, and it wasn't really a good thing. You give someone like him who's well-versed, who's got all these little tricks to sanitize what he's actually saying, and then you give him a soft interview where, like, she said something like, and this is why people think you're a racist, Mr. Bannon. You may not be. She made sure to add that. You may not be, but you refuse to condemn people like, Orban or Salvini, the deputy PM in Italy, who's called for cleansing of migrants from entire parts of the country. She said that he refuses to condemn them, so that's why people think he's racist. And I just felt like that was such a soft thing to say to Bannon.
Yeah, I haven't seen the interview myself, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me oftentimes when these people get hosted. Like what was said earlier, it seems more like an exercise in showing people how nice and kind you are than an actual like demonstration of this is how to platform somebody with extremist views and then responsibly tackle that.
Right.
Can I ask for a clarification real quick? When we say liberal here, do we mean like a liberal, like liberalism, or do we just mean somebody that like leans left socially or politically? Or?
Yeah, good question. What do you mean, Nesrine?
Well, I think it's a liberal has become a third classification, right? Because before, a liberal was someone who leaned sort of left of center. And there was a time actually in the UK where liberal and left wing were interchangeable. But now the way I use it is liberal in the sense that it's sort of non-partisan, neither left nor right, avowedly. So they, make it clear. Like The Economist is a very good example. Of this sort of neutral, liberal, centrist, non-partisan, subscribes to Enlightenment values, rationality, individualism, etc., but is very specifically non-partisan in their politics. And I think that's a really good question that you ask as to how we define liberal, because it has evolved very quickly in the past, I would say even just 2 years, in the way that it's used to denote basically, it's used to denote somebody who is not on the right, but definitely doesn't like the left.
Except these people usually are on the right, and they just can't admit it to themselves.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I think it says something. I think, to be fair, what has happened is that there are many people now that have either genuinely or cosmetically taken on board progressive values, right? So I think you can realistically be someone who is, things that are not classically right-wing, in the US at least, right? So you can be someone who believes in gay marriage, who believes in sexual freedom and reproduction rights for women, who believes in freedom of movement, all these things that before you would not associate with the right, but who fundamentally does side with a white patriarchal establishment, who thinks that political correctness is bad, who subscribes to basically myths about identity politics, all that kind of stuff. So I think that there is a new, which is, I think, a good thing, potentially. I think there is a new demographic or a new political leaning, which is people who have agreed in principle to a lot of the things that on the right are not givens, right? But who don't necessarily subscribe to principles that are of the left, which are, fiscal distribution, equal distribution fiscally. They don't believe, for example, in representation based on identity and all those things. So I think that there has been, in the culture war, there has sprung up a new faction that is neither right nor left. And that's why I think they're so hard to pin down, because people on the left accuse them of being right-wing or even alt-right, and they legitimately can say we're not. Mm-hmm. And people on the right, can't dismiss them as Antifa. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So it's a long answer to your question, Destiny.
Gotcha. I'm just making sure for purposes of this conversation, I've got it straight. I'm familiar with the definition you're using. I've got a lot of, for better or for worse, I've got a lot of lefty fans now, like left, like socialists and commies that get upset when people use liberal to refer to just people that are left-leaning rather than people that are not. Yeah, so I'm just making sure we're on the same page for that. And then in the United States, we use liberal to just mean Democrat sometimes. It has nothing to do with the idea of liberalism or liberal whatever. It's just what we call Democrats. So there's a lot of different definitions for the same word, it seems.
Right, and I think what muddies the water, especially in sort of the skeptosphere that I know Destiny and I are kind of familiar with. I know, Nesrine, you're familiar with the IDW and Majid Nawaz and that kind of thing as well, but I don't know how closely you follow it. So for me, I think that group has muddied the definition and confused things on the word liberal, because they use classical liberal to indicate that they're not right-wingers while they're championing the right on almost everything. So
almost sounds like virtue signaling.
Right. And, there's YouTubers like Sargon like that. He joined UKIP to own the libs or something. And so it becomes a mess. I refer to myself as a liberal, but I'm pretty firmly on the left. I'm not a communist or a socialist, but, I'm what North America would refer to as a liberal and progressive. So, yeah, it's just a whole mess with the term liberal. Like now people on the left use it as an insult too. And sometimes.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
It's like centrist liberal in the UK is used on the left as an insult. because, what did they say? The left looks for, the right looks for converts and the left looks for traitors. And the left in the UK right now, does look for traitors, and the centrist liberals are the big traitors of the left in the UK. Anyway, we're digressing, but
Yes.
it's a whole other episode, I think.
Right, exactly.
Something that I think is really important, and I think it's to the fundamental heart of this matter, and it's something that extremely frustrates me, and it's what's caused my position to change so much on all of these issues, is it feels like I'm trying to think of the most polite way to inform this, or to say this. It feels like it becomes a matter of how, I don't want to say intelligent, but how informed you are on certain issues that frustrates me when it comes to the positions people take. So, for example, we speak about what somebody would call themselves as being a liberal. They might say that they are pro-gay marriage, pro-minority rights, pro-sexual freedom, etc. They might say all of these things, and they might even actually believe these things internally. But the problem is those core values get filtered through so much uninformed, unintelligent gray matter in the front of their brain that by the time you get to the end, the policy positions that they end up taking become indistinguishable from people that flirt with fascism. So, for instance, you might get somebody that says, I am pro-minority rights, and they genuinely might believe that. So in the United States, I'll use African Americans or black people as an example, right? They might say, like, I really do not hate African Americans. I'm not racist at all. And it's like, okay, cool. However, I believe in conservative economic ideals, and I think that welfare is evil, and I don't think we should have to provide funding for their schools, and I do think that, these things are justifiable. And it's like, at the end of the day, when you look at the policy positions they take, it's like, okay, well, like, you're literally indistinguishable from somebody that is racist. Like, it doesn't seem very productive that your core values don't line up at all with the policy positions that you advocate for, because you just seem woefully uninformed of your policy positions.
And also, the right and left are continuously evolving, right? So what was classically right-wing a couple of decades ago may not be the same now. So if you're like a gay conservative in North America, it's possible for you to be right-wing and not against gay marriage, right?
Yeah, for sure. Or you even find a way to be for it and against it. You live in this weird dichotomy, with this weird dissonance, where you get your figures like, for instance, you might say, like, I like gay people, and now you have proof of that. You say, well, look, I like Milo Yiannopoulos. He's gay, and now he's my gay figure. And it's like, okay, cool. Well, what does Milo say about other gay people? Well, they're lazy, and he would never hire one.
Right.
And like all of them should engage in pedophilia relationships. Like, Jesus, okay. What? I guess you might be like yeah.
Right, exactly. So I find that the deflections from being called right wing and clinging to the label liberal very interesting. But anyways, we're going around in that discussion. Maybe you guys can talk about, like, maybe Destiny, you can talk about how your views have evolved on this free speech debate. I know mine have tons, but yeah, maybe you go first.
Yeah, sure. So unironically, internally, I probably hold a lot of the beliefs that I outwardly criticize today, just because I realize the social impact of the way that other people participate in these types of online discussions. So for a specific example of this, so two examples. I'm in favor of people saying essentially whatever they want, that any insult shouldn't carry with it some some gravity, that the connotation of the word can overcome whatever past prejudices it was used with, etc. Or that, for instance, having representation in media isn't necessarily the most important thing in the world, that I could play a million different video games or watch movies where the lead character is Asian or black or whatever. And these are beliefs that I genuinely hold today. These things are things that don't bother me. Now, whether that's because I am white and that's a whole other discussion, but I'll say right now that these are things that don't generally bother me. And I would talk about these things all the time, and a lot of people would agree with me, and I'm fairly articulate, and I felt like I was making good arguments, and I felt good about the people that agreed with me and that followed me. But what I noticed is that as the years ticked on, any time something would happen that diverted from certain cultural norms, all the people that I thought were on the same page as me suddenly started to shift. So, for instance, I might say, like, I don't care if the main characters are all women or all minorities or black or Mexican or whatever. That's fine. When movies, when film, when TV shows, when video games started to come out where they were increasing the representation of these characters, I didn't care. That was fine for me. I don't care. I've said a million times that I don't care. But all of a sudden, all of the people that were following me, that I was making these arguments to, started to get very upset. And I noticed this trend where people that tend to be socially conservative will use things like free speech or free ideas and the marketplace and blah blah blah, that they don't actually believe in these concepts. They're just kind of like a means to an end, where that end is just furthering whatever the social norms of the time are. So they might say, I don't care what the main character in any film or video game looks like, but what they really mean is that 95% of them right now are white, straight, and male, and I hope it stays that way. and that was a very frustrating realization for me to come to, because it's like, oh God, wait a second. Like, it felt like all of these arguments that I thought I was making well, the people following me didn't actually care about those. I was just kind of a convenient way for them to argue with other people that weren't being represented, right? That my arguments were just being used in a negative fashion socially, and that really bothered me.
Yeah, I think I went through a similar realization, because being a left-leaning ex-Muslim who does, think it's important to criticize religion, but then, you have to put it in the context of the climate and what you're saying and how you're saying it, what media you're saying. You don't go on Rebel Media or Breitbart and say, like, there's no place for Islam, should Islam be eradicated, shit like that. You don't, that's just, I find, highly irresponsible. So I came to the realization.
I agree 1,000,000% with it. Just as a quick, I went to school for music, and I should understand that, but I for some reason with speech I treat it totally different, where the idea was that whatever you say, that's what you mean, and if people misinterpret it, that's their fault. But that's so stupid, because everything you say is seated in a cultural context you have to be aware of. And I don't know how I didn't get that earlier. Exactly.
And so, if I'm in Pakistan, I'm not going to go and criticize Christianity along with Islamists on Islamist outlets. You know what I mean? So it makes a big difference who you're speaking to, where your voice is coming from. These kinds of things didn't seem to matter to the people that were kind of using me as an ex-Muslim to criticize Islam. And then I'm like, wow, there's something really sinister going on here. And I took a step back, and I think this political climate with the resurgent far right has really, really helped to expose who was actually principled and concerned for minorities and who actually just wanted to bash Muslims. So, yeah. And Nesrine, I mean, you've put out articles about, how hate speech leads to violence. And I think recently we really saw that in America. So, if you can talk about your position on free speech.
Well, I think the whole free speech thing has become way more complicated than it actually is, because there are so many, as you just exhibited, so many bad faith actors, even though I don't like to use the term bad faith, because it's like the first thing classical liberals throw at you, and you just know you're about to lose an hour of your life going around in circles. But yeah, it's very simple. I think where we fall down is because we end up having these sort of abstract discussions about freedom of speech and what it is, and it's a slippery slope, and they'll come for you next, and when actually no one is shutting down anyone's free speech. That's the sort of myth in all of this, is that in the beginning, when people would accuse me of shutting down free speech, I wouldn't even question the premise, and I would say, no, this is why free speech should be shut down. And then I realized I actually hadn't been advocating shutting down free speech at all. There's two types of free speech controversy. One is the legal one, which is, state intervention to prevent people from either speaking at a conference or on, Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park in London, or from entering the country, or for being put in jail, such as Anjem Choudhury in the UK. That is a very high bar, which is incitement to hatred, to violence, and also libel comes into that as well. Like, people forget that libel is a big part of free speech that no one really seems to have a big problem with, actually. No one's
not
going
libel as in the way Majid Nawaz understands it, though, right? Like,
no,
you send him a tweet asking why he tweeted out a shitty article, and he screenshotted you and is working to sue you. Yeah,
that's not the kind of free speech I'm looking for. That's just thin skin. But yeah, for example, the UK in particular has very strict libel laws, and I don't see many people demonstrating in the street that libel laws are a violation of free speech, right? Because everyone knows that they might get libeled as well. So that it's, it's good for everyone can see the value in libel laws. And until in the sort of all, far right or white nationalist movements began to become more popular in Europe, and you had generational identity in Europe and Tommy Robinson in the past 2 years in the UK, no one really was fighting for the right of radicals to have free speech either, whether it was Muslims or anyone else. But then suddenly everyone's very concerned about the right of Tommy Robinson or, Steve Bannon or Sellner in Germany to have the right to speak. And so that's the first bit, which is how much do we want to empower the state to shut down properly, classic shutting down of someone for having hateful or insightful views. That is a conversation that has been happening for a very long time. Right? It's been happening for 200-300 years from the beginning of basically legislation regarding free speech. And some countries decided to go down a stricter route, such as the UK. Others, such as the US, they're a bit more licentious with free speech. But the US also has libel laws. It also has something in the Constitution against fighting words, which I take it to mean incitement. So there's no such thing as absolute free speech on a legal level anywhere in the world. So there's not much controversy around that. And I'm very open to actually having that discussion. I think, a country's constitution, its laws are open to interpretation and reinterpretation as times change, right? So, for example, I'm very open to people reviewing free speech laws in the digital era, for example, and saying that, when free speech laws first came into effect, there was only 1 or 2 types of publishing, which is books and newspapers. And now we have social media, we have WhatsApp, we have all these ways of sending information. So that's one debate, which I think is fine and non-toxic and actually a healthy debate to have. Then there's the second debate, which is, if you refuse to appear with someone on a panel, is that shutting down free speech? No.
Right, exactly.
Is objecting to something someone said in a column where they vilified Muslims and asked them to apologize for that, is that shutting down free speech? No. Is demanding as a student body in a university that someone who thinks that women who have abortions should be arrested, do you as a student body have the right to protest that? That is not shut down free speech. So this is this whole confected argument that we keep having all the time, because successfully the free speech myth people have managed to draw us all into a conversation about freedom of speech when it is not about freedom of speech as such. It is about how much, as individuals, we want to curate the public discussion in our civilizations. And the public discussion has fallouts, real life fallouts, for people of color and for immigrants and for women and for Jewish people and for transgender people. Like, it's all about trying to curate the public discussion to make sure that we don't create an environment that is unsafe for these people. And the fact that it's become a free speech crisis issue, I think, is a massive red herring. Sure, are there 2 or 3 incidents where people have been, I've just done a load of research on this for a book that I'm writing, and it is staggering how much, when you follow the breadcrumbs of every free speech crisis story, there is nothing there. You know what I mean? Like, it's stunning that there are so many of these crises that are either not real or are confected, right? Where it's kind of a death by free speech ruse that in the US in particular is played by many right-wing organizations that kind of fund student groups on college campuses to book the most controversial and the most ridiculous person to come on stage, so that there is objection to that. And then people are like, see? Snowflakes, freedom of speech being shut down, etc. So there's a very confected, very bad faith, very deliberately twisted aspect to this debate. The problem, and this is the bit that I'm concerned with, because people who are going to have a bad faith conversation are going to do it whatever you do, right? Mm-hmm. What concerns me is those that should know better, who are the liberals, right? The people that don't have an agenda to push, that aren't trying to create culture wars, that aren't trying to drive a wedge between, people of color and white people or whatever. Those who are on the curators of the conversations, the publishers, the journalists, the columnists, the writers, the TV presenters, Economist editors, mm-hmm. New Yorker editors, that whole class of public discussion curator have been caught on the wrong side of this confected issue because free speech is a very dear value to them, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of pausing and saying, actually, this is not about free speech, it's about something else. I don't know what it is, but it's about something else. And on that premise, we're getting discussion. Instead of doing that, they're like, oh, no, definitely, yeah, this is terrible. There's no platform being shutting people down. And so they're the ones that I'm really disappointed in.
Right. And there's a quote from your article, which I think covers this well. Freedom of speech is no longer a value. It has become a loophole exploited with impunity by trolls, racists, and ethnic cleansing advocates. They are aided by a group I call useful liberals, the defend to the death your right to say it folk, and the writer Mari Uyehara calls them the free speech grifters, those who flog PC culture as a singularly eminent threat to the freedom of expression. And as you said, it's often not even about like free speech being limited. What are your thoughts on, say, like, Alex Jones being booted from social media, or the Nazi Twitter platform Gab losing access to PayPal and whoever was processing their payments? What are your thoughts on things like that?
Well, I think this is where it gets interesting, because this is where we have new methods of speech, right? I think that one could legitimately question whether removing a platform from Alex Jones is depriving him of his free speech rights to be on Twitter and be racist like everyone else. Mm-hmm. But I think everyone else. It can be legitimately said that Twitter is a private, non-state actor, and it has the right to make an informed decision about the risks of having someone like Alex Jones on its platform and the responsibilities that they owe Alex Jones's victims. And that responsibility that has is the responsibility that we all have when we are curating a public discussion. Like, go back to the point about how it's about the public discourse. Mm-hmm. And the curators of that public discourse are private individuals, and they all have the right to make that decision, right? They all have the right to say, we feel like this is toxic and that it is potentially harmful. And, if one reduces it to your own circle, right? We allow people to make decisions about who they want to interact with and consult with in their own personal and professional lives, right? Mm-hmm. Because your own professional life and personal life is a private matter, and you have the right to say, this is harmful to me and harmful to people around me, and therefore I'm going to recuse and withdraw myself from this platform, mm-hmm. whether it's an office or whatever. So I personally think that Twitter's decision is correct, and that they are pursuing, or they're basically litigating a case that involves them being a curator of a public discussion. Mm-hmm. Does Alex Jones have freedom of speech? Yes. He can go and stand in the street and say whatever he wants and chase the parents of kids that have been murdered and saying they're crisis actors, right, and will not lose his liberty or his life. And so, the fact that he doesn't have the right to do that on every single platform he chooses to is a different matter. Yeah,
I think this is the big thing here. Like, I get so frustrated in the atheist scene and movement where these things are brought up as like legit. Oh my gosh, Milo was taken off of Twitter. Free speech is over. The evil left. And, Alex Jones being taken off of YouTube. That's the end of free speech. And it's just, this isn't what I consider. I mean, these are companies putting out a product, and they have a right to decide if someone is ruining how their product or service is being used. They have a right to remove them from it, like Richard Spencer being removed from the gym, like the crying Nazi Chris Cantwell being taken off of a dating service. I remember people were outraged and called it like leftist groupthink that the poor guy can't even date anymore. And it's like, well, no, he's not entitled to a dating platform. I mean, he could be a threat to their other customers. So they're perfectly in the right, I feel, to remove them. And I don't think that that's a free speech issue. And Destiny, you had some interesting thoughts on this, I know.
Oof, these are all things I spent a lot of time talking about. I'm just going back through what was said earlier. So the first thing about libel laws, oftentimes what I find when I have conversations with people is they tell me one thing, but I have to use several test cases to figure out what it is they actually believe, because they're not very forthcoming with it oftentimes. So I hear a lot of free speech advocates will talk about how freedom of speech is important, liberal values, First Amendment for the United States, our Bill of Rights, all this is really, really important. But then when you turn around and ask them, okay, well, it's interesting that you believe that. And I see a lot of these people constantly talk about the importance of free speech and all this. When I go to your YouTube, or if I look at your Twitter, or if I look at any social media you have, I notice that you're strangely silent when Trump threatens to attack the press, when he threatens to open up libel laws and sue journalists that say bad things about him. And when he says he wants to make it so that people that burn the flag are no longer considered citizens of the United States. Like, these are pretty big First Amendment, right? We've got freedom of the press, freedom to protest your government, I don't understand how you could be so quiet when the head of state is saying these things. And this is where I get to that point where it's like, so it feels to me like freedom of speech is a useful tool for you, but you don't really care about it as a concept. It's more so that you want to use it to further your conservative agenda, and that if you can use it in an argument one day, that's fine. But if it's used against you, you abandon that principle immediately. Roping back into what was said on the last half, and I can't believe that people don't see the irony here, is when you talk about Twitter or Facebook banning somebody for political reasons, that is freedom of speech as a private company, or at least insofar as I understand in the United States. It might be a little different in the United Kingdom, but in the United States, as a private company, you can platform or deplatform people based on their political opinions. That's your right as a private entity. That is your freedom of speech. And you'll get somebody that will say, I don't think a private company should have the right to do that. And they'll say that, I don't think they should deplatform people based on their political views. But then when you ask them, okay, well, we had a very famous case in Colorado where a baker didn't want to serve a cake to somebody because they were gay, and he didn't want to do that. They'll say, well, you can't force them to serve that cake. That's compelled speech. Well, okay, well, what do you call it when you're asking Twitter or Facebook to be mandated by the government not to ban people based on their political opinion, that they have to host certain opinions that, they might not want to host? How are these so dissimilar?
Except, like racists and conspiracy theorists aren't protected classes,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not even getting into, we don't even have to get that far to find the huge irony.
Right.
And then to move into, the next point you guys brought up, that people will strawman you into defending freedom of speech. And sometimes people are very, very aggressive with strawmanning, with giving you positions that you don't actually hold. And I find myself defending things sometimes, like I have to step back and be like, wait a second, I don't actually
exactly.
How did I get caught in? Yeah, and people do this thing with free speech where it's like everything else that conservatives. Hopefully, my bias is showing. I don't care. Where conservatives will do this thing where all of a sudden you're in an argument, and then at some point you're like, wait a second, I feel uncomfortable because I don't feel like I have any good arguments. And it's like, oh, wait a second, I never argue for this. Somebody would be like, how can you, Colin Kaepernick is kneeling at NFL football games. Like, why do you hate the U.S. Army so much? And it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, like, they're imperialistic. We spend a lot of money on it. Wait a second. Wait, this isn't about the military at all. Like, wait, why am I in this discussion with you? Like, what does him kneeling at the NFL game have to do with the military? And people use like these freedom of speech or the troops or nationalism. Do you love your country? They'll wrap themselves in these concepts. And anytime you critique any part of their platform, they feel like their platform is inseparable from these core ideas that really like 95%, give or take a few points, probably agree on. Like, no, and at least in the United States, I don't think anybody hates the troops. Or there probably are some, but it's a very small percentage. I don't think most people hate freedom of speech. This idea that people defend themselves with these values so they can't be attacked is so frustrating.
Right, that the left has no arguments, and so they want to shut down freedom of speech.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and then the last thing I've got written here, I think that there are a lot of super interesting discussions on freedom of speech. I don't think that there are any clear winners. I think that it starts, you have to get very, very rooted into what you value. And it makes me very upset because the people that champion free speech are so horrendously misinformed about it. I don't know if you guys all saw the, I don't know what your tolerance is for stuff like this, but if you saw the Dave Rubin video where I believe it was an Israeli student asked him about how do you feel about people that free speech leads to violence against certain groups of people. Did you ever watch this video?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, so basically she asked that question and he was incredibly indignant, and the video was, called, Dave Rubin owns college liberal or whatever. But the thing that shocked me the most is that the question of, free speech can lead to violence. What do you do about that? It was very clear watching that video that Dave Rubin had never considered that as a concept before. And it's like, this is like, I am a high school freshman and I'm flirting with this idea, and now I'm going to look into the first line arguments against it. This should have been solved so long ago. And that's actually a really interesting discussion, And, some people might say, and I know it's tempting to say that free speech can lead to violence, therefore we shouldn't value it. But we do that with other things in society. For instance, our access to automobiles leads inevitably to a lot more death and destruction. But we accept that trade-off. Our desire for privacy from the government. I'm sure the government could protect us from almost every terrorist attack if we gave them unlimited access to all of our communications, but we obviously make that trade-off as well. So it might be that freedom of speech as a concept is so important that it's worth trading off the comfort of some groups of people. Maybe not, but those discussions aren't happening.
Those are the real discussions. Yeah,
exactly. And that would be a fascinating discussion. Is it okay for some groups in society to be harmed to protect this value? I would love to hear those discussions, but instead it's like the SJWs and the PC police want to take away all of our freedom of speech, and I really just want to be able to say the N-word online on Twitter.
Right, but that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, and 99% of the time I hear it's so cringy because there are so many labels that I would use on myself that I will never publicly, I would never say I'm part of the atheist movement, even though I'm a very anti-theistic person. I'm very anti-theist. But I would never call myself I'm an atheist publicly because Christ, all the people that come up and rally around you are so horrible.
I know.
And I believe in free speech as well, but Jesus, not like Dave Rubin does, not like I'm going to have a
oh man,
Candace Owens is going to come to my show and talk for 20 minutes without me interrupting her a single time. Or Ben Shapiro is going to tell me to my face that he hates my lifestyle and he would never serve a cake to. Oh
my gosh, I don't know, Nesrine, if you are familiar with Dave Rubin, but if you're researching these free speech,
I am, unfortunately. Yeah. I mean, I try not to because I think that most of the time, I think there's two discussions about freedom of speech happening. One is an online one where it's become part of this sort of radical. It's sort of a radicalization tool, really.
Yeah.
Online, if one is going to be completely straightforward about it, and I think Dave Rubin and the rest, I just struggle. I struggle to take them seriously in the sense that I just know that they're not interested in having an actual discussion. They're basically preachers, right?
Dave actually hates free speech. He really does. He's threatened to sue journalists just for calling him right-wing. He's actually tweeted stuff about defunding the ACLU because they posted something positive about Linda Sarsour once. Yeah. And, I mean, it's ridiculous. And
I think the way I think about these people, I found it helpful to. I spent a lot of time in Saudi Arabia, and
so did I.
Oh, really? Yeah, they remind me a lot of in the sort of 1990s. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Destiny. I'd be very impressed if you were, because it's very niche. In the 1990s, there was a sort of satellite TV revolution in the Arab world, the same way there has been an online revolution in the Western world.
Yeah, that's when we got our satellite dish. We stopped having two channels. It was amazing.
Exactly. So most households in the Middle East and the Arab world stopped having just the state TV channels and began receiving pan-Arab satellite transmissions from Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, etc. And one of those streams was religious TV channels that just had these young, telegenic, very good orators that were preachers. They wore suits and they didn't have beards and they were just as radical.
Oh, so this is what's happening though.
they were just as radical as the old kind of bearded Saudi establishment ones that you'd kind of see on a Friday. And this youngish group of TV preachers would have these very sophisticated discussions about how we need to follow religion, not because it's an obligation, but because it makes sense. Right, and so they were very rationalist about religion, and when I look at Jordan Peterson, all I see is these guys.
Yes,
right?
And have you seen that there are some of these like hardcore Islamist types that are Jordan Peterson fans, anti-feminist? They've picked up on the anti-SJW rhetoric. There's Muslim MRAs. It's like the crossover is
huge amount. Yeah, there's a huge amount of synergy between the two, because fundamentally what these people are arguing for is social Darwinism, right? They're not even necessarily left or right wing. They're just, patriarchal social Darwinists who believe that, that believe that women are inferior, that believe that, the men who are stronger are better than men who are weaker. They value very old-fashioned, fetishized ideas about.
So they're like right wing from the 1800s.
Yeah, but they wear fancy suits and they have league degrees.
One thing that I think is really important to distinguish here, and it's actually something that's so frustrating, is that I actually do think there is a marked difference between, so what you're describing almost sounds like the kind of new, like neo-Nazi strategy for selling, I guess maybe you could say fascism, or certain types of aggressive or offensive ideologies to people, where people realize that dressing up in hooded cloaks with tiki torches is a bad idea. No, people are going to look at you like freaks. People are going to say you're obviously bad. But having people like Richard Spencer, who is well-spoken, he is cordial, he's somewhat handsome, I guess, appears, nice on all of his TV shows. He doesn't use bad words. He dog whistles like crazy. He doesn't say anything overtly horrible. I think that this type of strategy, it sounds like what you're describing with the well-dressed people that are, selling the old same brands of sexism. It sounds similar to that. But I think that, sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, you're not a fan of Peterson still, are you?
Whoa, I was never a fan of Peterson. Don't say that. Sorry. My God. Oh, no. Oh, geez. I think that his personal self-help stuff, that very narrow field, I think is okay-ish, but Jesus, anytime he strays outside of that lane, it is abhorrent. Okay. The frustrating thing is that I think that these people are in the very slim minority. I'm about to parrot bunch of lefty talking points, and it's going to hurt to do it, but I think I have to say that it's correct at this point. I think the frustrating thing, in my personal experience, if I get somebody who wants to have a discussion about, I'll use African Americans, and they believe that African Americans are genetically inferior to white people, I would rather talk to that person than 10 people that say, I really love all minorities, and then here are all the reasons why I don't think we should have any sort of financial redistribution. I don't think we should have any sort of fiscal help or whatever. All sorts of welfare, all sorts of electronic benefits. All of this.
So what about this renewed rational skeptic interest in race and IQ? You know what I mean?
I think that what happens is most of them are just idiots. I really do think that's what happens. It feels like it's not, but I'll use a great example in the United States. So healthcare in the United States, I genuinely believe, is impossible as this is. I don't know how I still believe this, but I genuinely believe that most Americans want healthcare for most people in the United States. I really do believe that most people, outside of a very fringe amount of sociopaths or something, genuinely do want most people to be healthy. So the question is, well, how the hell do you get half of the country, at least politically speaking, against something like single-payer healthcare then? Because empirically, every Western nation in the world that I'm familiar with, save like Switzerland and maybe a very, very small number of others, use some form of single-payer healthcare. So how do you get all of these Americans that have the value of one? This is where I talk about, remember earlier, value and policy positions. They have the value of wanting people to have healthcare, but then they come out and they defund, the ACA. They vote against any sort of single-payer. They don't want Medicare expansions. Like, how does this happen? And I think it just comes down to a level of informedness, where they'll say their answer won't be, if you ask somebody, why do you hate Obamacare? Their answer will never be, and I think genuinely, their answer answer won't be inside, well, I want less people to have healthcare. What they'll say is, well, I think the government muddies everything up and the free market can do better. So it ends up being where you have this value, but it's processed by somebody that is so uninformed that they end up with a policy position that becomes indistinguishable from somebody that is filled with hatred. And I think that even though it might sound like I'm just mincing words or being, linguistically trying to separate these things, I think that there are huge differences between these groups of people and how they have to be treated in terms of bringing them over to agree, if it's even possible, in terms of bringing them over to agree with the policy positions that better represent the kind of world that you want to build.
And how do you propose that they're treated? The dumb ones, not the malicious ones.
Man, if I had an answer for that, I would probably be out doing it. I mean, like my perfect world goal. I mean, like the thing is that to be clear, I don't practice in rhetorical techniques of persuasion because it's oftentimes boring to me. I like to just have the fact-based conversations. So I mean, like my masturbatory fantasy would be that if you present somebody with enough compelling evidence that single payer is the best way to go for healthcare, that they would be persuaded by logic and fact and reason. But I mean, the reality of the situation is people respond differently to certain types of emotional stories, to certain types of narratives. But I mean, my goal would be that if you understand that people want most people to have healthcare, then your goal should be to sell it to them in a way where you don't accuse them of running contra-indicative or whatever their own values. That rather than saying,
but that's what they're doing, though. Yeah, that's what you think they're doing.
It is what they're doing. It's what I know they're doing. But I think it's important that I just listened to an episode on this of somebody else actually talking about this. But basically, we have images of ourselves in our mind where so I might think I am a good person and good people want most people to have healthcare. If you come at me and you say for most people to have healthcare we need to do X, that's going to be a more successful persuasion technique than to say you don't want most people to have healthcare because you believe in Y. Because immediately when you start a conversation off like that, what they'll think is, well, hold on, I know I'm a good person. Why would I listen to you? You must be lying.
Sure.
And that's sort of, to reconcile that cognitive dissonance, they will wave away everything you're saying. Yeah,
but when you're talking about things like spreading racism, scientific racism, Nazism, I think it's understandable that someone can get frustrated and angry and just say the truth rather than coddle them and baby them and try to slowly coax them. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's what I do. I totally understand. I have no desire to do this. I'm speaking, I guess, to the person that wants to take up persuasive techniques for politics. I just call these people, if I get somebody on my show that says that they are believe in the superiority of white genes, my first two questions are, well, what do you do for school? And oftentimes it's like college dropout or whatever. And then what do you do for work? And oftentimes it's some very mediocre thing. It's like, okay, well, what did you do with your superior Aryan genetics that like makes you worthy of even talking to? So I mean, like, I totally understand what you're saying in terms of it's frustrating.
Because then this becomes a scolding point for like people that want to scold the left, right? No, you have to hug Nazis. No, you can't like tell them that they're racist. That only makes them more Nazi. And that's,
well, I guess the thing that makes me sad sometimes, and this is where most of the people that support me come from, is that it feels sometimes like you have this dichotomy of truth versus social justice, where you can only pursue one of those at a time. You can either say like, well, let's have this fact-based conversation, blah, 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 or you can say, I don't want to talk about that. Rhetorically, I want to focus on social justice. And I actually think it's a mistake that left-leaning people have seemed to just concede all of the fact arguments, and somehow these become conservative talking points. Like,
but how so?
So, for instance, like conservatives will always say, Ben Shapiro does this, my facts don't care about your feelings, or, I want to talk a fact, like I'm too interested in the facts. But it's like, okay, well, let's have this conversation. The facts are generally on the left-leaning person's side.
So how do
I don't
they
agree.
Concede it?
Because it seems like they concede it because a lot of the times they don't want to engage it in the conversations.
Okay.
So for instance, like when it comes to immigration, and maybe this is just my own personal brand of sociopathy showing, when I talk about immigration in the United States, I will never talk about providing a better life for immigrants, for helping them escape from bad situations, mainly because I don't think conservatives care, but because I don't need to. Like, I can just speak on a purely economic level and win that argument every single time, because no economist is ever going to tell you that immigration to your country is a net fiscal drain. And this is one of the things that
but do you see that someone whose life is at risk or someone who's recently come here may not be able to have that level of detachment, understandably, like, they feel like they have to justify their existence and their being here.
Oh yeah, I'm talking from my perspective as a perspective from a public figure that argues. I wouldn't expect an individual to engage in these types of conversations. The responsibility is much different between an individual versus somebody like. So I would consider myself like a semi-public figure or whatever, right? Because our conversation,
even public figures, right? Like say that you're from an immigrant background, or like me from a Muslim background. I get so much shit from, even though I have talked to far right people pretty calmly and stuff. I still get, my the levels of my authenticity challenged because I'm not hateful and generalizing Muslims. So I get shit like she's not a real ex-Muslim. Her parents were never really Muslim to begin with. She didn't really experience suffering. She wasn't oppressed enough in Saudi Arabia. Like shit that, if someone on the left would have said to Ayan, they would have lost their mind. Imagine telling an ex-Muslim woman who's grown up in Saudi Arabia and dealt with morality police and their canes that they have not been oppressed enough in Saudi Arabia simply because I had access to a British school and a community pool, and morality police wasn't allowed into my compound, so I didn't have to deal with them 24/7. That doesn't mean that I did not experience oppression in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. I guess it's just the feeling that I get is like, let's say that you've got two employees, one is Sam and one is Nick, and Nick is coming up for a performance review, and one manager wants to fire Nick because they don't like him, and let's say that Nick's performance is on par or better than than Sam's performance, and you go to talk to your boss, like, okay, well listen, you can't fire Nick. Nick is a really cool dude. That's so bad to do it. It feels like when you say that,
that's
you've already
argument.
Conceded.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, it feels like you've conceded that you're ignoring the fact that, wait, hold on, you're not winning by your own argument. I don't actually need to talk about whether Nick is a good person or not. You're just wrong on what you think is your fact-based argument. And Ben Shapiro, oh God, they all do this so much. When Ben Shapiro will get up and he'll talk about, well, if you want to be called a he and you actually have a vagina, my facts, the fact, blah, 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 don't care about you. Like, what facts are you talking about? The entire APA, the American Psychology Association, stands against you. Biologists stand against you. There is no scientific figure that is ever going to defend your very socially constructed, hardcore dichotomy of male versus female. Like, that is literally your feeling against the entire fact of multiple scientific disciplines. Like, I just hate it when liberals, or people on the left, I should say, concede the fact-based argument immediately and then try to appeal to social values. I understand the value or the need for social values, of course, but like, don't just give up the fact-based argument like you've already lost. 99% of the time, those arguments are on your side.
No. I agree with you there 100%. I'm just saying that when someone who it's more of a personal cost to is put in that position of having
very hard.
Defend their existence, then it's very hard. And it also is like, I don't want to fucking engage with every asshole that wants me to justify my very existence. And you shouldn't have to, right? Everything is not always up for debate. Like, there was a prominent atheist dude who's one of the moderates and not one of the worst ones. He was on someone's YouTube channel talking about how everything should be up for debate and minorities should have to, justify their existence in a debate. And I just think that's a really douchey thing to say, especially when it has no bearing or impact on you.
Yeah, it's like a form of oppression that most people in a certain level of privilege wouldn't even acknowledge. But yeah, I totally agree. It's
like, why is everything constantly repetitive? This is the sunlight. Going back to the sunlight is the best disinfectant argument, right? Like, do we have to repeatedly talk about why Holocaust denial is bad and why, racism is bad when we've won these arguments?
Well, I'd only add one thing, which is that, I don't know, maybe my experience is different, but I think the interpretation that some of these people are just stupid is kind of an optimistic one, in that I would prefer it if people just didn't get it. And I think it's because they don't want to. I think this is why I actually don't engage at all, or engage very little with any feedback I get, because I feel like what we're dealing with now is a group of people who have decided that there are certain things that they're going to use to shore up their worldview, and shore up their status, right? And their status might be only relatively in terms of immigrants, right? So like, if you are a white person who doesn't have a great life, doesn't have a great job, doesn't have a university education, as you said, it is more likely that your status vis-a-vis other white people is not as you would like, but you will always have status over Mexican immigrants, right? Or you will always have status over Muslims or whatever. And so I feel like it's always a case of trying to shore up your status and your worldview. It's a slightly kind of highfalutin and maybe too abstract way of looking at things. Because it just feels to me that there is now a whole kind of hierarchical, it's all about hierarchy. The way I think about it now is it's all about hierarchy. And it's all about people holding on to whatever little relative advantage they have in that hierarchy.
Do you, I'm curious, when you look at somebody like Dave Rubin or Sargon of Akkad, are you familiar with these two figures?
Yes, yeah.
Do you think that these people are genuinely racist?
I think they are, yeah. I think those two particular examples, I think they are, in that they, if they, even if they have not admitted it to themselves, they genuinely put their self-interest above the safety and security and, general well-being of people of other color. And if that is not racism, then I don't know.
Yeah, so maybe this is so interesting, and I don't even know how you would go about quantifying this. So we fundamentally differ on our view here. This is what I feel, and I could be wrong, but I really feel like, man, if I was wrong on this, I don't even know what's possible for me to hate people any more than I already do. But what I feel is if I were to lock Dave Rubin, or if I were to lock Sargon of Akkad in a room, and I were to lock him in a chair, and in front of him, I had all the smartest people in the world, and I just, for 48 hours, bombarded them with fact after fact. If you do this thing, indoctrinated them with intersectionality, that, hey, if you're a minority, your life can be impacted by all sorts of different systems, that not having representation in media can lead you to feel shitty, the way that your classmates treat you because of your skin color, the way that the police treat you, that all of these things, if I were to bombard them with irrefutable fact, and that every time they brought up an objection, oh, well, what about this? That's a sociologist or an anthropologist or some sort of political side would be like, oh, well, nope, here's this, that they would come out of that room. And I really, really want to feel like their internal values of, because when I've talked to Sargon, oh God, a very disappointing amount of time. And our whole conversation on black issues in America, his solution was, well, they should just get married. That'll fix all their problems. It was so incredibly ignorant. But I really do feel like if these people knew all of the facts, that they would change their mind, because I don't feel like they genuinely hate these types of people. Do you think I'm wrong?
If I can,
I completely disagree.
Yeah, me too.
Oh no.
Yeah.
And I think, but to be fair, I think it's probably, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think it's because I've spent my formative years arguing with smart radical Muslims. That I just know when the battle is lost. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like I have spent so much time around rational, smart, ostensibly good people who have fused their own self-interest and their own status in the world with their religion, because what religion does so well is give you a sense of identity and a sense of identity vis-a-vis other people. That's the second most important thing that it does. And I've just spent so much time talking to people that I could see, like, you can see it in their eyes. Like, sometimes you can see the wheels turning in their eyes as they try and like turn away from the fact and like move around it. Because
to be clear, there are people that I agree that this happens with. So are you familiar with like Lauren Southern?
No, I don't know who that is. I'm sure there's people, okay, let's not generalize. Obviously there's people who are open to, fact-based arguments, etc. But I think as a whole, what we're dealing with now is that we're dealing with an identitarian religion. And I think that you can't really fight that.
I guess what it feels like to me is that we agree that both these types of people exist. It's just their distribution. It feels to me like if I were to take 100% of people that have racist policy positions, what it feels like is 5% of them are the driving, very intelligent people. These are the people that will say immigrants from other cultures with other values are coming into our countries, and through crime and their refusal to integrate are destroying our countries through no fault of anybody else, but they're just destroying our countries, and we need to protect our heritage and our, like, these are the people that are genuinely racist and will dog whistle.
But Dave Rubin is fine with those positions. In fact,
but that's what I'm saying. I'm
he
saying that 5%
labels
of people
Tommy Robinson extremely moderate.
Yeah, and this is the main criticism, or this is a big criticism that a lot of lefties have of liberals, is that 5% of these people intentionally do this. The other 95%, because the other people dog whistle it, they're too dumb to see that, so they're just along for the ride. So somebody like Tommy Robinson might say, I want to hate on all Muslims because of all these reasons, and if you attack me, you're attacking my freedom of speech. And then all of the other 95% of people are like, whoa, wait, hold on, he said freedom of speech. Yeah, we should defend that dude. Rather than them actually hating these people, they're just kind of swept along for the ride because they're too dumb to see that they're being manipulated by as useful idiots, essentially.
Like, I don't doubt that there are stupid people like that. I just think that the two that you specifically mentioned, they may very well also be stupid and ignorant, but they passionately feel for these things as well. I've observed Dave for years now, and I used to buy that argument maybe 3 years ago, but when it's a consistent pattern of him feeling so strongly for these far-right lunatics and really feeling their values and really sanitizing them and going out of his way to portray them as exceptionally moderate, saying Katie Hopkins is a very nice person.
Or Candace Owens.
Or whatever. But then you see the outrage when Google just has a diverse doodle just on the Google homepage. He is so mad. So you can see what drives him.
Maybe because I used to be one of these people. I don't know how familiar with my past, but like if you look at videos of me 8 years ago, you will find like videos of me making very strong arguments for why anybody should be allowed to say like the N-word or whatever online, that these shouldn't matter. So maybe I empathize. Yeah. Maybe I empathize with people just because I used to be so far over in that camp. But like, let's go to a real world example. I'm very curious. So let's take the value position of, I think that men and women are, I don't want to say equal, but should both have equal opportunity, equal respect, blah, 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 under all matters of law and social pressure, that anybody should be able to do whatever job they want, live the life they want, etc. I love women. Let's say that's like your default value. I think it's possible to, like say for Muslims, right? People will look at something like the hijab and they will say that every single woman that wears this, hates it. And every single person that makes them wear this, hates women. Yeah, but it's not actually true. You will find women that will advocate for the hijab and even more extreme forms of covering themselves out of their love for women. And in a really kind of bastardized sense, you get, people call this internalized misogyny or whatever, but you will get people that seem to have these outward policy positions where they're prescribing a behavior that appears to be insanely anti-women, but because of the kind of cultural environment and social environment they live in, they're advocating for these policy positions, but they're doing it out of a love, maybe misguided, for the groups of people that they outwardly appear to be attacking.
But if at the same time they, always are hanging around prominent known misogynists saying that these people and their values are amazing, you're going to start to wonder what's driving them, right? And then anything that suggests equality for women, they shut it down and it makes them so mad, then you can no longer claim that.
Well, I think it's because what happens that, oh my God, I feel like I'm giving so much credibility. It feels like my parents are like this too. It feels like what happens is it seems like they hate them, but if you understand like the paradigm through which they view the world, it starts to make more sense. So for instance, like you might say, okay, well, listen, like women should be allowed to wear what they want. And you might think that like you're making a strong argument for women's freedom. And then they're saying things like, well, no, this is wrong. This is wrong. It's like,
no,
okay,
but that doesn't make sense if it's a repeated pattern of supporting hatred of women.
Sure, but
there are people who do think that hijabs are, part of just freedom of, and I don't think they should be, made illegal or banned or anything like that either. So I do think that women should be allowed to wear what they want, and if they want to cover their hair, then so be it. I'm not a fan of, religious modesty coverings, but I'm also not like a reactionary atheist type that sees a hijab on TV and, I don't know, just loses it. So that's a whole, the reason I don't want to discuss hijabs here is because I have so many feelings about hijabs, and it's such a long conversation. But if we could stick with the racist thing,
or women's rights is a really good one. Where like you could have a person, for instance, that's against abortion, against birth control, and is pro not allowing women to work conventional jobs at the workplace. And all of these values can be explained through an ignorant lens of, I really love women. And I think that when abortion is legal, it encourages women to murder babies that they would otherwise love to keep. And when birth control is made legal and freely accessible, women engage in sexual relationships that make themselves less happy in marriage. And that when women are kept at home instead of in the workplace, they're genuinely happy with their children. That somebody can unironically have all of these viewpoints that come across as horrendously anti-women, but they don't actually hate women. It's just the horrible paradigm through which they view the world.
But they do view that women have a specific role, to birth children or procreate, or this is how women's roles are, and that's what they should be doing. That is a form of hating women in itself. You may not realize it. At least to me, I don't know if we have any, pro-lifers on.
Yeah, I agree that outwardly I agree that outwardly it comes across as more or less the same. If you're a woman and you get an abortion, you don't care why it's illegal. If it's illegal, this is different.
That for all purposes, these people are acting to push racism, to support racism. But you think that somehow they're doing it out of naivety and not out of actually being racist. You can be like a naive sort of racist too, right? Like
I call them unintentional racists. Yeah.
Right. So then they are racist.
Well, yeah. The only difference is that the way that you have to deal with these people is fundamentally different.
Okay, let's just stick to the question. Are they racist?
That's a loaded question. Like outwardly, they advocate for racist positions. Internally, I guess it comes down to how you specifically define it. I just think there's a difference between how you treat these groups of people because they respond very differently to different types of rhetoric.
That didn't answer the question.
Well, so when you say racist, like, what do you mean by that?
There's so many degrees of it, though. I think you just have a high bar, and you're thinking Richard Spencer or maybe a KKK hood-wearing guy. But there's like all sorts of mild, unintentional racism that perhaps even, someone can engage in racism and not really be like a racist. You know what I mean? Everyone
I agree,
can accidentally do or say something that they didn't mean to, and it's kind of, why'd you do that, right?
Yeah, sure.
But then there are people, I guess, who, this is a pattern. This is how they live. These are the values they subscribe to. Now, whether they come from ignorance or whether they come from just pure hatred, ultimately, both of those things, if you are repeatedly engaging in promoting that day after day after day, sanitizing, people like Tommy Robinson, Katie Hopkins, what other word is there for you? You can talk about approaches of dealing with different degrees of racists as an aside conversation. But ultimately, I think denying that they are racist is harmful.
It's possible, I guess. The difference would be in terms of how I analyze their internal beliefs. So here's the difference. In the United States of America, President Donald Trump won the election in 2016.
Is he racist?
He's indistinguishable from one.
Oh man, you can't even just say yes for him? Are you serious?
Well, so like the difference is that if half of America like legitimately hated minorities and women, then the only solution moving forward is a literal civil war.
No, I'm not talking about everyone that supports him. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about him.
I think that he probably is. He's made enough statements that
this is political correctness.
I think it's
gone wild.
I think that Trump would be part of the small minority that is leading other people that aren't like. I think that Trump is more racist than the average Trump supporter. If that makes sense? So like Trump will say like, I want to build the wall because I think Trump actually does have something against brown people, but I think that a lot of Americans will support. Yeah, but I think a lot of Americans will support it because they think it'll make the country safer or help the
But
economy.
what you're not understanding, I think, is that racists also think they're good people, and they come from like what they think is a place of self-preservation. They're only trying to protect their homeland. They're only trying to protect their country. It's not necessarily, even the KKK will say, we don't hate black people, we just want to preserve the white race.
Yeah, that's the new neo-Nazi talking point.
Right.
I guess maybe it's my consequentialism talking. I guess I feel like looking at the internal drive is really important to understand how to address these people. Because again, like if somebody comes up to me and they're like, I hate black people, like let's talk about social issues. My conversation with them is going to be way different than a guy that's like, I'm anti-affirmative action, pro-gentrification,
but I think those people are less harmful. The open racists, I feel like you can weed them out. People can ignore them or recognize the threat associated with them. It's the people that dress it up, that repackage it, that are so dangerous right now. And so when you talk about like, the neo-Nazis kind of marketing, reinventing themselves by wearing suits and stuff, to go back to the sunlight being a disinfectant, the very first thing, even if you don't think that it always is a good disinfectant, is that you actually need sunlight, right? Now, if someone's holding an umbrella to their views and not really being open and saying, I love minorities, I just am exploring rationality and science, and therefore I think that people that are not white have lower IQs. And so, that is much more harmful than someone that's like, wearing a hood saying, I hate people of color. I
agree. Yeah, I agree. I think the only difference is we disagree on the internal drives of these people. I hope I'm right and I hope you're wrong because, man, I've already switched so much in my support of democracy and capitalism and everything has gone so far low because of my average view of people that if I had your view, I don't know how I could handle existing in society. Oh, man.
But, when you're a brown woman, you kind of have more things directed at you and you pick up these, like, do you agree with that? Like maybe just...
Oh, absolutely. Your experience is going to be far, far, far different than mine. So you might be driven to feel much differently. I can't imagine. I mean, I can try to, but not really. Your lived experience is going to be far different than anything that I can try to envision in my mind. Yeah. Yeah.
So even the Nazis being rebranded now, there's still another group that is much more legitimized, that is much more academic, that is much more mainstream. But they are pushing the anti-immigrant talking points, the anti-feminist talking points, the anti-trans talking points. They're holding hands with far-right people like Ben Shapiro. And that is why I criticize the so-called intellectual dark web, because they are dedicated to maintaining the same hierarchy, as Nesrine was talking about hierarchies, and they are threatened by any shifts in the hierarchy. And to me, that is the way they mask it as science and rationality is far, far more dangerous than even Richard Spencer trying to cover up the nastiness of his views, because people still are seeing through Richard Spencer. He was still at Charlottesville carrying, he was, right?
He must have been, right? Ooh, I should know this. I would imagine.
Yeah, I know. I should know this too. It's like such a basic question that I'm shocked that I don't. But he was still, pro Unite the Right. He's still pro alt-right. He's an open white nationalist. That people can still see through, even though as many maybe don't, because it's been rebranded. There's a lot of stupid people out there that will follow these things, but once it becomes legitimized and academic and scientific, that is frightening to me.
For sure.
So, yeah, sorry for going on a rant like that. But, sunlight being the best disinfectant. Nesrine, what do you think? I mean, if it was, do you think that giving Trump all this airtime during the election would have gotten rid of him, or would have at least ensured that he wasn't elected?
What, that if we'd seen less of Trump?
No, because we saw a lot of him, right? They gave him so much coverage that he was getting that sort of sunlight. Even he was being mocked, and everything of his was being picked up on, and all his stupid responses. But did that prevent him from winning?
I don't think if we'd seen less of him, that anything would have been any different. But I do think that if we'd seen, I don't think actually we saw as much mockery as we think we did in hindsight. Actually, I think we mocked him to ourselves, but I don't think we actually saw that much of it. I think that there was a lot of, especially on American cable TV, I've been to see what Destiny thinks about this. I think there was a lot of glee about the fact that Trump's running for president, because they were like, this is an amazing freak show of Trump and his surrogates. And, you know, we're going to have them on every night. We're going to have 9 people on either side of Anderson Cooper. And we're going to have a circus, because it doesn't matter, because Hillary's going to win, you know? And I think it wouldn't have mattered how much we saw of him, but I think it might have mattered if they had dealt with it with as much seriousness as they do now, you know? And I think at the time they just thought it was a bit of a joke and we could all come in and go at the freak show. And now they're all like, they're being far more considerate about it. But I'd like to go back to one thing. I sympathize with Destiny not being able to say that Donald Trump is racist, because I think that, I mean, I've struggled with this, right? Because there's a new type of person, right? There is a new type of person that is cosmopolitan and liberal and elite. So the question I ask myself all the time is, do you think Donald Trump would have had a problem if Ivanka married a black man? And I don't think he would. You know what I mean? I don't think he
would Donald Trump have had a problem if he married a black woman?
No, if his daughter married a black man, right?
Oh. So,
and this is just me completely hypothesizing.
It's like Milo having a black husband.
Yeah. No, I'm just trying to draw the whole the continuum, right? So Trump is someone who would be happy to be, you know, he's a New Yorker, he's around people of color, but at the same time he allegedly banned them from renting some of his apartments because he didn't think it was good for the brand. And I think that, and, you know, he refers to people from Africa as people coming from shithole countries, but at the same time has behaved in ways that are kind of just sort of sloppy, right, about race. And so I think that, I think Trump is a racist in the sense that he has a callousness and a lack of respect for people of color as a whole, where it comes to his bottom line. You know what I mean? So I just think he's kind of a not in my backyard racist, right? But is he a racist in the way Steve Bannon is a racist?
Oh yeah, of course.
Right?
There's different degrees of it.
There's different, but I think the way people talk about Donald Trump being racist is sometimes sloppy, right? I don't think Donald Trump came to the presidency with a racist agenda. You know, I don't think he came there with any agenda, actually.
It just becomes indistinguishable from an actual racist agenda.
Exactly. And so, but the useful thing, though, is that people can make. So if I'm struggling and if I'm trying to be kind of accurate with the taxonomy of racism, then you can see how useful that is for people that claim that none of these people is racist, right? You can see how useful it is and how you can collapse all these different things.
But that's because, you know, people are viewing racism through a very narrow lens of the classic outward, you know, racist, not this cosmopolitan person who's fine hanging out with people of color if they share the same ideology.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that the difficulty is that there are just way more cosmopolitan racists now than there were 50 years ago.
Right, and they've learned to use culture instead of race.
Well, I think another thing is that, these things are legitimately they are very hard to understand. And to defend all my fellow white male, sexist, misogynistic, whatever people. So I live in a Western society, and I'm a white straight male. I literally have never in my life been told or made to feel like I can't do something because of some intrinsic property of who I am. It's just never happened. There's never been where somebody's treated me like a way because I'm white, or made me feel like I shouldn't do something because I am male, or that the way that I was acting wasn't acceptable because I'm straight. These things have never, ever happened to me. The way that I often present this idea to my stream, because it's really hard for especially people in video games, right, to understand how this is that if I were to lock if I have a room, okay, and I want you to craft the funniest insults, the meanest way that you could be to somebody in this other room, and I were to tell you three things: their race, their gender, and their sexual orientation, that if you drew a card for a white straight man, you actually can't insult this person. There's nothing you can say. Like, there's just not. You have to learn more about him to say something negative, because none of these properties are by default a bad thing, you know? But if it's a woman, well, there's like 50 million things I can think of as an insult right off the bat, because so many feminine traits are undesirable, you know, whether, or things that we call feminine traits, right? Like you're weak, you're, you know, bitchy, you know, a million different things. If you're a certain minority figure, you know, whether you're black or Indian or Hispanic, there's a million go-to insults. If you're gay or trans, of course, or any of these more, but the farther away you are from the norm, the more easy it is to take a dig at you. And all of these things are so hard to understand if you're a white male, that like when we move away from, if you look at sex, or if you look at, say, racism, right? It's gotten to the point where, like, if there's not a literal black man hanging on a tree outside, there's no racism, you know? And people like Sargon will do this to me in arguments. And this is why, I'll continue to defend that. I don't think they're really sexist, but like I'll say to Sargon, like, hey, you know, there are a lot of social pressures and things that come together to kind of push women towards certain fields. And somebody like Sargon, well, I won't say something like Sargon. Sargon actually responded to me, and he'll say, you know, like, okay, show me the law that makes it illegal for women to get a job and comp sci. Show me the law. Who's the man in front of the college building telling women? And it's like, it doesn't work that way, dude. This is so much more nuanced. And, you know, to some extent, it's almost frustrating that Western society has made a great deal of progress in terms of how we treat LGBT people, in terms of how we treat women, and in terms of how we treat other types of minority figures. And it almost works to our detriment sometimes, because when the big problems get fixed, you know, generally we're not killing gay people, at least not as much. We're not killing minorities we're not segregating people. When these big problems get fixed, it creates this illusion of, well, look, all the racism and sexism is gone, you know, like we don't have to worry about it anymore. And these more nuanced topics are so hard for people to understand. They don't have to experience these things on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think when you don't experience these things, you do develop certain blind spots. But many people are able to rise above that and have empathy for situations that others, can be in. You know, like I'm a straight, cis, brown woman, and I don't experience homophobia personally or transphobia, but I completely understand it. Maybe it's because I'm in a minority position, I understand the vulnerability and the subtleties that go with that. But it's just, I mean, there's plenty of straight white men that understand racism and sexism too.
There are some, but like, so here's something that, I consider myself to be the response is narcissistic. I would hope that I would be a relatively above average intelligent person. I think I do a pretty good job at understanding arguments. I think I try to do a pretty good job at empathizing with people, et cetera, et cetera. Up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I didn't really believe that sexist comments were that big of a deal, because it wasn't something that I'd ever personally experienced.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/Nice Mangoes. No Ian Mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter @Nice Mangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal. nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no Ian Mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too.